Hello friends, my name is Jake Montanez, and in this video, this is my self-publishing vlog. I wanted to talk about going from a rough draft and my process with that to converting it to like a full trilogy and what my thought process was in doing that. Okay, so over here, just for a quick glimpse at it, this is Lightblessed Chapter 1. This is obviously hosted on Royal Road. This is the rough draft version of what I'm currently working on, which is book 1 of Night of the Illumination is the first part of it, and then followed by Desert of Storms and then City of Lights are going to be the next two. But I wrote this as part of NaNoWriMo 2021. If you look at this, it's what I've got documented right here. It originally started way back then. So that was where I first began everything. That was when it all started. That's what I wrote down and published every chapter every single day. I wanted to make sure, as part of my goals for that, was to write a chapter a day and upload it to Royal Road, because they had that, what was it called? The Write-a-thon also going on, which conveniently enough corresponded with NaNoWriMo, and I'm 100% sure that was planned. So I wanted to have it as part of both of those things as a goal. As I wrote, I had a big overall story arc going on in my head of where I wanted to take the main character, Trinea. And if you've followed my story before, or followed my process before, I've talked about how she was a World of Warcraft character and a Death Knight. A Death Knight is somebody who has died and has been risen from the dead to become a warrior. If that doesn't tell you anything else, that should tell you the overall story arc of where I really want to go with this character. And this story, Lightblessed, was to document the very first portion of that, for me to understand who she was as a character, for my readers to understand who she was as a character, and what was ultimately going to be her downfall. Now, what do I mean by downfall? I mean she's going to die. It's a spoiler alert. If you can't figure that out from the concepts that I've already talked about in the past, or if you're just joining me now, Trinea is doomed to die. And I wanted to see who she was before that point and what leads to her becoming a revenant, a being lifted from a dead body and coming back to life. And I have some really intriguing concepts that I'm not 100% sure I want to continue with for the next portions of the story. But Lightblessed, the one I just linked to you, showed you in the early part of this video, is the overall documentation of her fall. She goes from being an innocent young woman to being corrupted by forces that she has no control over, and also by forces within her that are warring between what she thinks is supposed to be true and what she knows is supposed to be true. And she has a lot of confusion going on and ultimately turns against her friend. So after I wrote this overall story, I have that story arc where she leaves her home, goes through this desert, and ends up in the City of Lights. I've already alluded to those 3 different portions in this video. And after further analysis, I decided I wanted to do a couple of things. I wanted to both rewrite the story overall, because it felt amateurish at the time. And I also wanted to expand Daitan's role in this story. That's her friend. He's a little short goblin shaman. And try to see things from both of their perspectives and try to make a little bit sense of the 2 main sorts of magic that were occurring in this story, and give them a sense of, all right, this is how Trinea is relating to things, this is how Daitan is relating to things, and I wanted to have them kind of bounce off of each other. Following from that, I realized I needed to expand Daitan's story arc quite a bit, so I have had to do that in the rewriting of Night of the Illumination. So that made the story longer as well. And it's also providing some more meat to the story, a little bit more backstory to the magic powers that are going on, a little bit more of a personal reflection from his perspective that I wanted to add, and I really like the way that it's gone so far. The first book, Night of the Illumination, focuses mostly around the story arc from the first third of the rough draft that I had posted, and it goes from her discovering her powers, which was already a fundamental change. Her discovery of powers never really occurs in the first book. She already has them because it was an intrinsic part of her life. And I figured while I was trying to reconceptualize what was going on here, I realized that her powers and the world in general don't exist anymore. They're not something that is a very prominent thing. And the reason why that is no longer a prominent thing, I thought wrapped up really well with some of the stuff that happened towards the end of that rough draft, and I needed to redesign how everything worked, which is another reason why I wanted to rewrite the story. So in the rewrite, instead of receiving her powers early on in life, being born into them and raised knowing that those are inherent to her, instead I've changed it so that the very first thing that happens in the book, in the prologue, so don't skip it. If you're a prologue skipper, you cannot skip that prologue because you'll be kind of confused. She is introduced to these powers in an unconventional manner and does not realize she has them until early on into the first chapter of the book, where these powers start awakening to her as a stimulus response to her environment, and things start to go rapidly downhill from there. The rest of the first book is dealing with her and her best friend both having these two different sets of powers, and these powers are incongruous with what she knows as the priestess's daughter, with how the light is supposed to work, and it throws her into a kind of an emotional, mental disarray. She doesn't quite know how to cope with the powers that Daitan has, as well as these new abilities that she is starting to gain and has no understanding of. The second arc of the story, things happen at the end of that first third that remove them from their home, and they begin to be both systematically, physically, mentally, and emotionally tortured on their journey to the City of Lights. And this mental and emotional torture is kind of the corruption that kind of spurs Trinea towards a darker path and spurs Daitan towards a kinder path, a lighter path. But they are both traumatized heavily by what they have to endure in the desert. The third portion of the story is after the desert concludes. They've made their way out of it, and the next focal point is going to be the City of Lights. Now, I have not begun writing that portion of it. I'm about halfway through the desert rewrite as I'm speaking of this, and I put that on pause in order to do the edits for the first book. I intend to finish those by that second portion of it, hopefully by NaNoWriMo, so I can start working on City of Lights during NaNoWriMo. And that's my goal, is to get at least a majority of that written in there. That third portion is going to hopefully tie together all of the things that have happened through the first two books and ultimately culminate in some sort of awakening with Trinea's understanding of what has all happened to her, things that go along with her mother's backstory and her best friend's backstory, and will provide some sort of catharsis for it. It also provides a soft ending to the story if I choose not to proceed onwards with her Death Knight aspect, if that's the case, maybe because this is where she will ultimately meet with her demise, and I will leave it open from there to figure out, and I already know where it's going to bring her back, but I think I might be pausing after that to write some other stories I want to get done first. But that's kind of how I decided to break it apart. There were 3 different acts to the story, and each of them had kind of a nice resolution towards the end of it, as they kind of bled into the next scene, and that's what I wanted to do with that. It's really hard talking about my story without giving too much away. I mean, it's already a super big spoiler to find out that the main character is going to die, but that's really the total arc of it, is that she's going to be moving towards that finish line, and that is not her finish line. She proceeds onwards from there as a revenant, an undead sort of being, and the way I want to transition to that is super awesome. I wish I could share it with you guys right now, but I can't because I'm not there yet. So if this sounds even remotely interesting, hopefully garner some interest to the story, please keep following my little saga here. Keep checking up on my vlogs every now and then. Subscribe to my channels, whatever platform you're following this on. Click like, subscribe, drop me comments, ask me questions. I'd love to answer them. I don't really get enough of that. I do answer everything I get at this point because I don't have that many followers or people asking questions. So please help me out. Thank you very much for watching, and have a nice day.